So what happens when civilization expands its presence into cyberspace? The next domain, the fifth domain, through which we create resources, data. How do you secure cyberspace? How do you decentralize control over cyberspace? Why wouldn't you expect it to be the same that we've always done it?
There's no substitute.
There's no substitute for physical power.
Even cyberspace is rooted in physical reality.
If you want to secure your data, you're going to need to find a way to impose a physical cost on someone who's trying to exploit you through your data or steal your data or execute some type of harmful control action through cyberspace. It is not rational to believe that we can secure ourselves in from through cyberspace without using something that converts power, physical power, into some form that we can wield in from through cyberspace to impose physical costs on each other, to physically constrain each other, to decrease the benefit to cost ratio of attacking or exploiting us through cyberspace. Cybersecurity will have a physical component to it. We just are waiting for that thing.
Is it possible that this new domain is almost, this may be a poor term, a meta domain of sorts, in that if cyberspace with the digital age continues to progress and more of our, I'm sure this is something you're getting to, more of our war fighting is done by drones, right? So the land power, the sea power, the air power is now being controlled through cyberspace, that domain actually becomes important in a superordinate way to the other ones, because that whatever occurs in this domain actually dictates what's controlling in these other domains.
Yes. In the thesis, it's the future of national security is cybersecurity. That's a direct quote. Cybersecurity is, I guess let's rewind. We created nukes and general purpose computers at basically the same time. We had the first general purpose computers in 1943. The first programs that those computers were running were designing the detonators for the Trinity explosion. So we designed the atomic bomb from the first general purpose computers. Von Neumann walks into Harvard and says, I'll be running this for the first couple months. And then when the second computer's built, he walks up and it's like, I'll be running this for the next couple months. Von Neumann was designing the detonator for the atomic bombs. So they were created at about the same time, but like that was pretty late in the war. And that was in the World War II was the last proper peer-to-peer war, like where all contenders are pretty closely, like there's not a huge asymmetric advantage. Nuclear bombs tilted the scales, but like it would have been a bloody fight to beat Japan. That was a peer-to-peer war. And so at the very end, like like a month after, it was like 2 months after Trinity, the war's over, like instantly. So we've never been in a proper peer-to-peer war where cyberspace, this new domain created by these general purpose computers, exists. It's been asymmetric. Every war fought after World War II is asymmetric power against like super strong versus relatively weak, or proxy wars, because the two nuclear powers can't.
Right. Stalemate.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's what I argue is the thing about a war is there has to be a winner. A nuclear war would be a war without winners. You can't resolve a dispute if both sides are dead.
Destroys the game board.
Yeah, exactly.
Potentially.
Yeah, so it's not an effective way to settle disputes.
Yeah.
Again, it's not an effective way to decentralize control over property or protect your property, to destroy it.
To destroy all the property.
Yeah. So we go back to, we design our technologies, our weapons, to be more powerful and more efficient. Well, the most powerful and the most efficient weapon we've ever created is nuclear bombs. Size, weight, and power-wise, you can't get more power. You can't get more punch.
Not even close.
Out of a nuclear bomb.
Right.
Out of a multiple independent re-entry vehicle on an ICBM, one button. I'm good friends with the people who know how to turn that key. And that's it. Over. Easy. Cheap. Highly effective. So again, humans are walking contradictions. We try to make efficient ways to project power only to make the most inefficient way to project power. So a nuclear missile with 7 warheads on top of it is the most efficient way to destroy or cripple another country. but it's too inefficient to use. It's too costly to use. It's the cheapest to launch, the cheapest to detonate,
Right.
the most costly to actually use.
Right.
And so what do people do? They deliberately go to inefficient power projection. It's like, oh, that's too much. We got to go back to just traditional non-nuclear kinetic war because that's the only way we can really realistically solve disputes now. I say that because we have to recognize that, and at least in these 4 domains that we operate, land, sea, air, and space, is we've already reached the point where our power projection technology is too efficient to be effectively useful. We cannot win a ground war, a sea war, an air war, or a space war with a peer and a peer, and let that scale to the nuclear level. Like, it's over. And no nuclear power, in my opinion, this is my opinion, not like the DoD's opinion. Why would you ever expect a nuclear power to surrender to another nuclear power? Like, Russia's not going to surrender. The United States isn't going to surrender to any other nuclear power.
Right.
Okay, so then comes this 5th domain, though. We're in these other 4 domains, and we're using deliberately inefficient, and we're able to win some proxy war, some minimal stuff, but no strategic level policy dispute, like an international monetary policy dispute. We create this new domain, and this new domain has data, and that data is really valuable, especially if you choose to monetize that data. Okay, so how do you secure it? How do you prevent people from exploiting control over it? How do you decentralize control over that data? There's one obvious conclusion. You just have to know and understand the function of war for 10,000 years and how the form of war changes, and you have to have the intellectual humility to recognize that you can't, I used to say you can't fuck this up because I thought it was pronounced General Foch, not General Foch. But the same principle applies. You must be willing to accept that this new technology will change the way of war. Because if you don't, that's a national strategic security hazard. And so if nukes come, you got to be good at nukes. If a new power projection system that allows people to project power in from through cyberspace to physically secure their valuable data or to decentralize control over cyberspace, you must be willing to accept that you have created a new form of warfare. But like, in my opinion, that's awesome.
Yes. And I think you might be being too humble, actually, because you said for 10,000 years, but if you take this power projection game all the way back, it's actually the billions of years that life has existed.
Right. Yeah, it's that human hubris there to believe that like we're the ones that came up with war. No, we're just doing the same thing. We talk about it with words,
right?
And the other animals don't really talk about it.
Yeah.
So if you create a new domain that has no mass, which is what cyberspace is, then how do you project power through that domain? Well, if it's got no mass, you can't project power or impose physically prohibitive costs using mass-based power projection technology. So kinetic power projection is out the window. You're not using force to displace mass. I'm not using swords. I'm not using bullets. Okay? It has to be probably some type of electromagnetic thing, like electricity. Watts are watts. I can impose a physical cost on you. I can project power with watts just as easily as I can, just as easily as I can electronically as I can kinetically. So it just makes sense if you understand the function of war, the function of security, to recognize that if humans expand its footprint and civilization into this 5th domain called cyberspace, then we will come up with some type of electronic form of power projection to secure ourselves, to decentralize control over our data, because we do it in every other domain, not just us, everybody, nature, everywhere. This is the way the world works. So it's actually really weird that we've gone 80 years since von Neumann was running calculations on the first general purpose computer, that we've gone 80 years without coming up with a protocol that everyone can use to physically constrain or physically restrict or project power against each other to secure their data or to decentralize control over cyberspace. It's odd that that's happened. It's like really silly that a bunch of computer programmers are acting and pretending like there's some magical combination of logic. There's some magical combination of if, then, and else statements and for and while loops that I can encode into my software that will secure my data. It is demonstrably ineffective. Okay? The cybercrime is the third largest economy in the world behind US and China. There's executive orders on improving cybersecurity. Cyberspace, you're being exploited through cyberspace. You got AIs, right. You've got new god kings emerging like Elon. You just have all of this crap going on that everyone recognizes, and then people are just like, don't worry. with the right script in Python, I'll be able to defend us against this threat. No, if you want to defend against this threat or secure yourself against this threat
in a physical universe,
you have
to use physical power projection.
You use physical power.
This is something you quoted Booth on earlier. I think it's a quote from Einstein, but you can't resolve a problem at the same level of resolution at which it was created.
Yeah.
So these logical domain problems cannot be resolved in the logical domain. They must be settled at the base layer physical domain.
Yeah, so cyber attacks are people exploiting the logic encoded into software. Mm-hmm. So it is not reasonable to believe that you can just add more encoded logic to secure yourself against the exploitation of encoded logic. Just saying it out loud sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
I can defend myself against people attacking me by exploiting these if, then, and else statements, by writing more if, then, and else statements. No, all you've done is just changed the way that you can be exploited.
Right.
So all these people trying to encode more logic to secure themselves are going through this 80-year game it's this 80-year fool's errand, in my opinion. Why? Well, because they don't understand how warfare works. They don't understand how power projection works. They don't understand how security works. We're a domesticated society. 98% of us don't even think about this kind of stuff. The remaining 2% do, but we're just nobodies in the grand scheme of everything that's happening. So we're often ignored. And so then the question becomes, let's assume this line of reasoning is valid, which no one has been able, in my experience, to invalidate it. Then the question becomes, what's that form going to be? What's that form of power projection going to be? What's it going to look like? And to answer that question, you go back to the basics of computer theory and computer science, and you think, okay, what's a computer? How does it work? What does cyberspace mean? Blah, 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 blah. And then you're like, okay, you pull that thread. What's the form of this new power projection technology going to look like? What is it going to look like when people physically constrain and secure themselves in cyberspace? And then you go and you look at Bitcoin and you're like, okay, that's not a coin. That's the future of warfare. That's the future of security. That's the future of people securing their data against exploitation and attack. That's the future of people decentralizing control over their data, of decentralizing control over this new resource in this new domain. Obviously, that's it. It's so incredibly obvious, but you have to take the time to step back and look at the function of defense, I should say security or physical security, function of warfare, you understand what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, cool. There we go. That's the first candidate. That's the airplanes of cyberspace right there. And we can look at it and we can say, no, that's not a form of war. It's an interesting toy, but no military value whatsoever. Okay, if you want to pull Ferdinand Foch, go ahead, but we'll see how that plays out.
Up.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Very impressive.